Star Trek Prodigy, A Dangerous Trade. Chapter 3. The Protostar's ground vehicle bounced through the narrow paths among Odaru's magnificent trees, the low-hanging branches slapping against the vehicle's shields and making them buzz and light up. Dal clung to the dash, and Jankum took a particularly sharp turn to avoid running into a thick tangle of tree roots sprouting out of the ground. "Why did I let you drive again?" Dal wailed, as he was tossed sideways up against the door. "Because Jankum Pog replicated this baby." Jankum jerked hard on the controls, and the vehicle spun to the left, barely missing another outcropping of smooth, arching roots. "Slow down," cried Rock Talk from the rear of the vehicle. "Zero almost flew out the window." "I'm fine," Zero said, although they didn't exactly sound fine. Dal twisted around to find Zero clinging to the rear window. Rock Talk clutched the carrier containing the battery to her chest, as if it might keep her from being flung out of her seat. "You okay back there?" Dal asked with a smirk. "Watch out!" Jankum sang out. Before anyone could respond, the vehicle launched into the air. For a moment there was a sense of calm, as if they were floating in zero gravity. Zero loosened their grip on the door. Rock Talk let out a sigh, and Dal turned back to the front, expecting the worst and finding it. "Jankum!" he shrieked, because the vehicle was heading straight for the trunk of a tree as thick around as the Protostar's warp drive. The smooth, reddish bark filled Dal's vision, and he braced himself against the seat. "Turn! Turn!" "Jankum Pog is turning, but the tree came out of nowhere." "Are we going to die?" Rock Talk said in a tiny voice. "No!" Dal shouted, not knowing if it was true or not. Jankum gave a tug on the controls, and the vehicle jerked sideways and clipped the tree with a shatter of bark and energy shield flares. "Found the road," Jankum said cheerfully. He had found the road, and the vehicle was about to crash land onto it. In the back seat, Rock Talk and Zero both let out screams of terror. Dal told himself to stay calm, as difficult as it was with the narrow road barreling straight toward them. "Wait!" Jankum yelled. "The anti-gravity!" And then he slammed his multi-mitt onto the holographic controls. Immediately, their free fall halted, and the vehicle, along with the crew tucked inside, drifted down to the road with the grace of a feather caught on a breeze. They landed without so much as a clank. "Told you Jankum Pog had this," he said with a grin, as the vehicle switched modes and sped down the road. Dal slumped backward, his heart racing. "Maybe fewer theatrics once we get to the market." "Yeah," Rock Talk stuck her face in the front seat. "You almost killed us." "Jankum Pog was in control the whole time," he said, patting the vehicle's dash. Rock Talk sighed and settled back into her seat. She turned to Zero. "Are you okay?" Yes. Zero's voice had a slight waver to it. "Now that we're on the road." "Yeah, me too." Rock Talk looked down at the case holding the vehicle battery. Now that they weren't crashing through the forest, she felt a new fear coiling up inside her. She still wasn't totally sure about going into Ogora Market as a designated battery holder. What if someone tried to steal it? What if she had to fight them to get it back? She curled her big fingers around the case. It looked so small in her hands, but just because she was big didn't mean she liked fighting. Jankum zipped the vehicle down the road. It wasn't long before there were other vehicles on the road too, mostly small personal vehicles, narrow little things that held only one or two people. They flashed by, engines whining. "Joyriders," Dal said. "People race them and stuff, or just ride them for fun." "Seems like it would be easier to just use a transporter," Zero said. "Maybe not everyone here has a transporter," Rock Talk said. Suddenly their ground vehicle shot out of the shade of the forest and into the glare of Odaru's brilliant stone-white sun. Straight ahead, the city glittered like a diamond. "Are we really going there?" Rock Talk gasped. Jankum pulled up the holographic map, their vehicle a small blue dot blinking its way across the terrain. Not exactly. Looks like Ogora Market is on the outskirts of the city. Makes sense. Most thieves' markets are, Dal said confidently. If Ogora Market is anything like the Indian Bazaar on ARP, half the stalls will be legit and the criminals will be all mixed in. If they get word that the authorities are coming, they'll scatter like that. He snapped his fingers. At the Indian Bazaar, they had this whole underground tunnel system set up so people could get away. He grinned, twisting around to look at Rock Talk and Zero, who were both gaping at him. I might have been down there once or twice. Fascinating, Zero said, just as Rock Talk said, You did not. I did, Dal winked. Well, then maybe you should be the battery holder. Rock Talk shoved the case at him. Since you're the one with all the experience. No way, Dal said. I'm the one that's going to negotiate for us. It's better if I have my hands free for that. What does that have to do with anything? Rock Talk said. Just trust me, Dal said gravely. Wow, Jenkum interrupted. Look at that. Rock Talk and Dal immediately quit their argument to turn their gaze to the massive sign glowing over the road. Ogora Market was emblazoned in flashing neon in at least 12 different languages. Dal recognized Ferengi and Federation Standard, which Janeway spoke. Arrows blinked in the direction of a turnoff in the road, and as they gaped out the window, the crew caught their first sight of the market. Are you sure that's not the city? Rock Talk gasped. It certainly looked like a city. Buildings were clustered tightly together, and small personal vehicles like the joyriders they'd passed on the road zipped in and out of them. Signs glowed in the air, advertising Klingon food and Orion trinkets and ship parts and treasures from the Alpha Quadrant. Jankum slowed the vehicle and pulled it over to a designated parking area where people from all different planets clumped together, clutching their purchases. Wow, this place is huge, Dal cried, because it was easily the biggest marketplace he'd ever seen. But when he realized how awed he sounded, he straightened up, coughing into his hands. I mean, we should be able to find a phase coil easily. I hope so, Zero said, scanning the figures in the parking area. They supposed most of the people there looked ordinary enough, but there was a clump of 3 Orions who strolled between the vehicles, studying each one carefully. Their expressions reminded Zero of the way the Watchers at Tars Lamara had inspected the chimerium that was mined each day, like they were sizing up the vehicles, trying to decide how much they could sell each piece for. Will our vehicle be safe here? Zero drifted toward the front seat. Yeah, Dal said, eyeing the same Orions that Zero had spotted. Better leave the shields up while we're gone. Can do. Jankum tapped on the controllers, and although the vehicle's engine died, there was still a faint thrum as the shields remained in place. Everybody out! Dal burst from the vehicle first, standing with his hands on his hips, breathing in the cool, crisp air of Odaro. It smelled like tree sap and energy shields and boggle, a kind of Klingon tea that Dal had tried once. Not that different from any of the markets he'd visited with Nandi. Jankum followed, bouncing with excitement as he took in the scene. Look at this place, he said. Jankum Pog bets you could build a whole starship just from parts you bought here. Stolen parts, Zero muttered as they floated out of the vehicle. Perhaps we shouldn't dally too long. I thought you wanted to see a thieves' market, Dal said, giving Zero a playful nudge. You don't want to stick around? Enjoy the sights? Eat some Tellarite mud stew? Jankum added. Jankum Pog can smell it from here. We do have a mission, Zero said. We mustn't let ourselves be distracted. I agree with Zero, Rock Talk said. She was the last to step out of the vehicle, her heart pounding furiously in her chest. Under ordinary circumstances, she might have liked to look around the market a bit. There was a sign advertising a chance to pet an earth cat that looked particularly promising, but under normal circumstances, she wouldn't have to carry around a replicated ground vehicle battery either. You two are no fun, Dal said. Come on, let's go. They walked together up the footpath leading to the market. People buzzed around them, a dizzying array of different species. The universal translators they wore could hardly keep up with all the different languages in the market, so snippets of unfamiliar words slipped through. Dal stopped them when they arrived at the entrance. Rocktalk marveled at what was before them, a huge arch of energy that cycled through "Welcome to Orgora Market," written in Federation Standard, Ferengi, Klingon, and dozens of other languages Rocktalk didn't recognize. She squeezed the battery close to her chest as people swarmed around their little group, flooding into the crowded market. "We've got a lot of ground to cover," Dal said. "Let's fan out, but we should keep each other in sight so no one gets lost." Rocktalk let out a sigh of relief. She was sure he was about to send them in on their own. "If you see anyone that looks like they might be willing to trade, let me know," Dal said. "I'll check them out and see what I think." Zero and Rocktalk both nodded, pressing closer together, but Jankum was bouncing around the entrance, brimming with excitement. "Let's get in there," he said, his eyes huge. He whipped around and grinned at the group. "Jankum Pog does not want to be Jankum Pog while we're here," he added. "Okay," Dal frowned. "As long as we find the phase..." "Jankum Pog will be the famous trader Fafnir Avant," he continued, posing with his chest puffed out. "He travels the galaxy searching for treasure that he's willing to sell for a price." Jankum's eyes glittered. "Okay, fine," Dal said. "Whatever. Let's get looking." And all four members of the crew stepped into the market. Somehow the din was even louder once they passed under the entrance arch. Dal and Jankum led the way, each one branching off to opposite sides of the path. Rocktalk and Zero pressed close together, trailing down the center. The street was lined with open-air buildings crammed with different vendors, all of them organized in no reasonable order that Zero could see. A booth selling some bright blue Romulan drink was cozied up next to a woman selling bolts of brightly colored fabric. Beside her was a man hunched over a split-apart computer, its innards glittering in the sunlight. "Hey!" Jankum bounded over to Zero and Rocktalk. "Rocktalk, come with Fafnir." "Who?" She squeezed the battery case closer to her chest. "Jankum Pog," he hissed sharply. Then he straightened up. "Fafnir Avant, the greatest treasure hunter..." "I'd rather stay with Dal," she said. Then she immediately felt a surge of panic. Where was Dal? Her eyes flew across the crowd until she spotted a flash of Dal's gray hair next to an electronics booth. "No, Fafnir needs a bodyguard." "A what?" But Jankum was already tugging her by the hand, pulling her toward a stand dripping with holographic jewelry. "A bodyguard," he said. "But he shouldn't speak." "I'm a girl," Rocktalk shouted. Jankum rolled his eyes. "Okay, fine. She shouldn't speak. Just stand behind Fafnir like this." He crossed his hands over his chest and scowled. Rocktalk glared at him. "Exactly. Perfect." "Jankum, No talking." Jankum whirled around, heading toward the jewelry booth. Rocktalk swallowed her anger and turned to Zero, but Zero had vanished. She froze as people bustled around her, an overwhelming sea of strangers. She scanned the market, looking for Dal or Zero, only to be jostled by someone pushing a cart overflowing with cuts of meat. "Don't block the road," the vendor shouted at her. I'm sorry," she said, trying desperately not to cry. She still couldn't see Dal or Zero, but Jankum was waving wildly at her, only a few paces away. She bolted toward him, hardly paying attention to where she was going. She was so focused on getting to Jankum, in fact, that she ran into another stranger, this one wearing a long black coat. This time, the case carrying the battery flew out from her side. Rocktalk yelped and grabbed at it, pulling it close to her chest. She patted wildly at the case and let out a long breath of relief that she could still feel the battery inside. "Thank goodness," she whispered as she darted over to Jankum. "Remember," he told her, "no talking." Then he marched up to the booth of blinking, shimmering jewelry. The trader there was a wan-looking Romulan who blinked dolefully down at him. "What's the matter?" Jankum shouted dramatically, planting his feet wide. "Don't you recognize the great Fafnir Avant?" Who? Said the trader. Fafnir Avant, Jenkum said. The greatest treasure hunter in 4 quadrants. Never heard of him, the trader said. You want to buy something or not? Jenkum rubbed his chin as he marched down the display of jewelry. This is all trash, he said. Fury, come with me. He whipped away from the jewelry seller, but Rocktalk made no move to follow him, just stood admiring the jewelry displays as they cycled through their different settings. It was so pretty the way the sunlight caught on the brilliantly colored jewels. Fury, he hissed, and Rocktalk blinked over at him. Oh, she said, you mean... You're mute, he reminded her. Rocktalk rolled her eyes, but she did follow him deeper into the crush of the market. It was better to play Jenkum's mute bodyguard Fury than to be alone among all this chaos. On the other side of the market street, Dal and Zero strode past different vendors. Dal frowned, frustrated. All of these shops were much too respectable for what they were trying to do. Most of them were just selling food anyway, and as delicious as they smelled, the crew wasn't on Odaru to eat. Do you still have eyes on Jenkum and Rocktalk? Dal asked Zero, who drifted alongside him. Yes, Zero answered. They're only a few booths away. Dal nodded. The last thing they needed was to get genuinely separated. This place was huge. Dal and Zero kept going. As they ventured further into the market, it was clear that this place deserved its reputation as a place for thieves. What exactly are you looking for? Zero asked. Perhaps I can help. They swiveled around in midair. I do have a wider range than you, Dal. Dal grinned. Maybe, but you don't have the eye for criminality. I beg to differ. Dal waved Zero off. Seriously, it's hard to explain. But someone who's willing to make a deal, they always have this glint in their eye. It's kind of like desperation, but not exactly. I see. Zero rotated slowly, scanning the crowds. Their gaze passed over Jenkum and Rocktalk, who had left a booth advertising firecrackers, and were crossing the street toward Dal and Zero. I think the others are headed this way. Dal gave only a grunt of acknowledgement. Zero continued to scan the crowd. It felt like its own life form, moving as sinuously as a snake down the narrow street. A few faces stood out. There was a particularly large Klingon who strode to the center of the path, a tiny yipping animal marching alongside his massive legs. A pair of Orion dancers swirled and spun as they made their way down the path, and the crowd parted for them, delighted cheers trailing along the dancers' path, and that cat-like Cation in the purple cloak. Hail the others, Dal hissed. I've found someone. Zero spun back around and floated alongside Dal. Where? Straight ahead, but don't be too obvious. Dal's eyes glittered. There's a Cation woman in a purple coat. Do you see her? Zero zoomed their focus up ahead. I do, but she just turned down that alley. We need to follow her. Dal surged forward, tapping lightly on his comm badge. Jenkum, Rocktalk, get over here now. Jenkum's voice spilled over the comm. There's no Jenkum here, only Fafnir Avant. Then Fafnir Avant needs to get over here now. Dal moved quickly, slipping deftly through a pair of women, haggling over the cost of formal gowns, then clipping around the corner booth belonging to a Ferengi selling jewel-colored drinks. Slow down, Rocktalk said over the comm. We can't keep up. Meet me at the side alley. Zero knows what I'm talking about. The alley in question appeared up ahead. Dal dived into it, his heart racing. He swept his gaze around, looking for the Cation in the purple coat. When Dal spotted her earlier, she'd been walking quickly, one paw pressed protectively over her left pocket. She had something she shouldn't, and she clearly wanted to unload it. The sound of scraping metal echoed down the alley, and Dal saw a door hanging open at the far end. He saw the Cation woman in the purple coat. She disappeared inside. Dal, why'd you run off like that? It was Rocktalk, coming to stand beside him. Jenkum and Zero were with her. You see that door up there? Dal asked. That's where we need to go. You're sure? Rocktalk frowned and squeezed the battery case close to her chest. Positive. Someone's buying illegal goods in there. He grinned. I told you I could spot 'em anywhere. Illegal? Zero cried. Look at all these vendors. Why do we need to go someplace that's selling illegal goods? Dal sighed, annoyed. We need to go someplace that'll fly under the Federation's radar. But we aren't doing anything wrong, Rock Talk said, and we certainly aren't doing anything illegal. You heard Janeway, Dal frowned. Federation wouldn't approve of using the vehicle replicator to make a battery to sell, so it's better to go someplace that won't keep the best records, just in case. Rock Talk and Zero glanced at each other. Zero could feel Rock Talk's doubt for just a second before they slipped out of her head. As a Medusan, Zero could read thoughts, but they tried to avoid doing it with her crewmates. Jankum, though, had no qualms about the questionable vendor Dal had in mind. Fafnir Avant is ready to make a trade, Jankum announced, rubbing his hands together deviously. Bodyguard, you go first. I'm not your ridiculous bodyguard, Rock Talk snapped. Stop arguing. Let's find out what's behind that door. Dal moved forward. Both Rock Talk and Jankum heard the urgency in his voice, and they did the same. Zero also understood the urgency, but something prickled at them inside their containment suit. It felt like a stray thought from the crowd, directed in the group's direction. They looked back at the alley entrance, not sure what they expected to see. It was empty, the crowd of customers rushing past on the main street. Zero sighed softly, then glided forward. The others were almost at the door, and that's when Zero heard it. A faint rustling. They whipped around. This time, they saw the flutter of a black cloak vanish around the edge of the alley's entrance. Chapter 4. I can't believe I have to stay behind, Gwyn said, draping herself dramatically over the captain's chair. Staying behind with the ship is an important role, Janeway said, and you do know it's typically officers who stay behind. So Dal should have stayed. Gwyn shook her head. It's so unfair. Dal had an actual life before he was sold to my father. I had never even left Tars Lamora before we found the ship. She straightened up in her seat and turned to Janeway. He even told us how he'd been to so many markets like Agora. Why not let me have a chance to explore a bit? Janeway smiled. He has a point about having experience. His background with Nandi means he knows what to look for. Yeah, but how am I ever going to get any experience if I'm stuck on the protostar the whole time? A gurgle drifted up from under the control panel. Gwyn ducked down to find Murph gliding toward her, his big eyes sad. You wanted to see the market too, didn't you? Murph broke into a big smile and made a sort of slurping sound. See? Gwyn sat back up in her seat. Murph crawled his way up to the armrest and gurgled in agreement. He doesn't like getting left behind either. Janeway smiled. Can I be honest with you, Gwyn? Gwyn sighed. Another lecture about my responsibility to my ship? No. Janeway walked over to the captain's chair and knelt beside it. Murph sniffed at her hologram. I was going to say you remind me a bit of myself. I do? Gwyn leaned forward, intrigued. Well, my real-world self, not my hologram self, Janeway chuckled. I was like you when I was an ensign, always volunteering to go on any away mission I could. She dropped her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. And perhaps going on more than I should have when I was captain of Voyager. Gwyn smiled. Something about Janeway seeing herself in Gwyn made Gwyn feel comforted. Maybe you can watch the ship on your own, Gwyn said mischievously. Janeway arched an eyebrow. Maybe I can. Really? Gwyn leaped from her seat, her heart fluttering in excitement. Murph chirped alongside her. Can Murph come with me? Probably for the best, Janeway said. I'm not sure I could stop him from eating the entire bridge. Both she and Gwyn looked down at Murph, who gazed guilelessly up at them. Thank you so much, Gwyn said. I can't tell you how much I appreciate this. Go, said Janeway, but keep your comm badge on you. You never know when you might need it. 20 minutes later, Gwen was staring up at the massive arch marking the entrance of Agora Market, watching as it repeated, "Welcome," over and over in dozens of different languages. Gwen had studied almost all of them back at her home on Tars Lamora, where she'd helped her father communicate with his many prisoners. "That was Ferengi," she said excitedly to Murph, "and Cation, and wow, I think that's Bolian?" She smiled down at him. "I just started studying it before we left." Murph trilled, wiggling his gelatinous head back and forth. Okay, I know. Let's go check it out." Gwen made her expression serious. "And stay next to me. No wandering off and eating anything, okay?" Murph only smiled in response. They passed under the arch, stepping into the flow of customers surging down the street. Buildings rose up like cliffs on either side of them, the windows all lit up with signs for the treasures that waited inside. But booths crowded around the outside of the buildings, too, trinkets and gadgets glittering in the sun. "Wow," Gwen breathed. "Look at this place." Murph bumped his head up against her hand, then began gliding toward a nearby booth, stacked high with wooden sculptures. "Murph, I said no wandering off." Gwen jogged behind him, catching up just as he reached the booth. "Welcome," said the vendor, a woman with a ridged nose and friendly smile. Her earring caught the sunlight, and Gwen recognized it immediately. She was a Bajoran. "Hello," Gwen said cheerfully in the Bajoran language. "Ah, you speak my language?" the woman said. Gwen nodded and answered in the language. "I taught myself." "Impressive." The vendor beamed at her. "It's been so long since I've heard Bajoran here on Odaro. Please look around." She gestured down at her display of statues. "Traditional Bajoran religious iconography," she explained. "That always pulls people in. But I have a whole variety of treasures inside my shop proper." Murph lifted himself up, eyeing the statues. "We'll see what you have inside," Gwen said. "Thank you so much." Gwen pulled Murph away from the statues, dragging him through the beaded curtain marking the entrance of the shop. Inside felt like an entirely different world. The clamor of the crowd outside was muffled, and the air was dark, cool, and smelled faintly of sweet, dark spices. Unlike the neat display of statues outside, everything inside was crammed wherever it could fit. A chaos of trinkets, electronic equipment, and dusty old antiques. "Murph, no!" Gwen darted after her friend, who had started to chew on the corner of a tapestry hanging from the wall. "You can't eat anything here," she whispered to him. "Otherwise we'll have to pay for it." Murph frowned, and to her relief let go of the tapestry. "Just look," she said. "No touching anything, okay?" They wove through the shop together. There was no order to the displays that Gwen could see. A set of crystal dishware sat on a shelf beside a precarious stack of old-fashioned communication pads, behind which rose an enormous carved statue of some kind of strange animal Gwen didn't recognize. There was a rack overflowing with traditional Bajoran clothes, and on the wall behind it, a holographic painting of the Crab Nebula. "This place is amazing," Gwen breathed, pushing her way toward the back of the shop, where she found an entire wall lined with glass jars filled with dried plants. Murph followed alongside her, gaping in wonder. He did not, to Gwen's great relief, try to eat anything else. Gwen gazed up at the shelves of plants. Each one was labeled neatly in Bajoran, a blend of spices and flowers. She wondered what they were used for, but there was no one in the shop to ask. Something glinted in the corner of Gwen's eye. Another shelf, this one lined with metal trinkets. The shop was so crowded she'd missed this shelf. In fact, it felt like every time she looked around she saw something new. "Come on, Murph, let's see what's over here." She patted him on the top of his head, drawing him after her. Most of the trinkets on the shelf looked like spare electronics parts, some of which had been affixed together to create dolls. Gwen lifted one of the dolls, staring down at its simple metallic face. It wore a dress of silk scraps, and its hair was a nest of fine, dead filament, all twisted together into a braid. "Do you like it?" Gwen jumped and nearly dropped the doll. "Oh," she said, "you startled me." She turned around to find the shopkeeper smiling down at her and Murph. "My assistant is watching the booth outside," the shopkeeper said, "and I thought I'd check on you two." She gave Murph a pointed look. "We're just looking around." Gwen felt herself blush as she set the doll back on the shelf. "We don't have much in the way of payment." The shopkeeper smiled. "If you want the doll, you can have it. No payment." "Really?" Gwen looked back over at it. Her father had never let her play with dolls, with any toys, when she was growing up. Her whole life he'd been training her, and of course she didn't want a doll now. She was too old for it. But Rock Talk might like it, and it might look nice propped up in Gwen's quarters. Of course. The shopkeeper picked it up and smoothed down the braid. "An artist in the city makes these out of old starship parts and other odds and ends. I've always found them charming." She handed the doll to Gwen. "And it's been so lovely to talk with someone in Bajoran." Gwen squeezed the doll to her chest. She'd studied languages to help her father communicate with his prisoners, but had come to love the process for itself. That it could eventually lead to her getting a gift from a Bajoran shopkeeper on a distant planet? Well, Gwen was as surprised as anyone at the direction her life had taken. "Thank you," she said. "Come back any time," the shopkeeper said. Gwen thanked her again. Then she and Murph stepped out of the cool, dark space, back into the brilliant noise and chaos of the market.